Welcome to the Excruciating Minutiae Podcast, where we obsess about sports, pop culture, and politics, but mostly sports. Here are your hosts, Randy and Steven.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Steven. I'll be joined soon by Randy. On Friday, Bill Maher got himself into a little bit of a pickle on his Friday episode of Real Time. He reignited his feud with comic book lovers, addressing them head on. If you remember back in November, he basically made some comment about when Stan Lee passed away and made some comment about people need to grow up, etc. And he went off again this week, talking about how he heard a lot on Twitter from a lot of fans. And then he added that he was unaware that he had, quote unquote, ruffled so many capes, and summarized the point of his blog by stating, quote, "I'm not glad Stan Lee is dead. I'm sad you're still alive." I mean, by "you're," he means comic book fans and those fans of comic book movies. If you don't know already, Randy is a huge comic book collector, a big fan of the genre. And he has a little bit of anger built up about this statement.
Use your aggressive feelings, boy. Let the hate flow through you.
That's not really my voice. It's close. But that's not really the voice I was using. Yesterday, when I first heard the Bill Maher statements, I woke up yesterday and I saw a notification because I have seen Maher's TV show before on HBO. I'd seen Politically Incorrect when that was a show, and I've seen Real Time. I don't watch it religiously or really all that often. I don't get an opportunity to. I've seen the show. I know who he is. I know his shtick. And I remember the comments from back in November where he basically said when Stan Lee died, what's the big deal? Because there were tributes and things coming in from all over the place, and he dismissed it and basically dismissed Stan Lee and his legacy. And that was pretty insulting to people I know in the comic book community, fellow collectors, because I am, as Steven mentioned, a big comic book collector. I'm a fan of the art medium, which Mr. Maher feels is not an actual legitimate art medium, which basically just shows that he's ignorant about what art actually is. But to add to the quotes, you mentioned my favorite where he said, "I'm not glad Stan Lee is dead. I'm sad you're," as you said, the comic book fan, are alive. That's a level of ignorance and a level of stupidity that I would like to say I'm shocked at, but in this day and age, you see it on a regular basis from so many people. Why should Maher be any different? Other comments he made, he said that, quote, "bragging that you're all about the Marvel Universe is like boasting your mother still pins your mittens to your sleeve. You can, if you want, like the exact same things you liked when you were 10, but if you do, you need to grow up." I didn't react very well to that. As I can imagine, you knowing me, Steven, you can guess. I was pretty fired up about that. Does that surprise you?
No, that does not surprise me.
Where do you want me to begin? I'm actually toned down now because I've had a day to kind of reflect upon it, but it's not going to change my perception of it. And you know, I kind of talked a little bit before the podcast about why he might have been saying it, but let me go right off the bat as to how stupid a comment this is. First of all, the comments he made back when Lee died were one thing, and that just showed an ignorance of what Stan Lee brings to the cultural landscape. His comments about comic books not being literature. Here's another comment he made. He said he took the occasion of Stan Lee's death to express his dismay at people who thinks comic books are literature and superhero movies are great cinema, and who are general are stuck in an everlasting childhood. Well, my comment to Maher is basically, he's talking about people needing to grow up. Maybe he needs to grow up. Maybe he needs to actually get more informed about the things he's talking about. I mean, he does have a major show on a major network that's seen by millions and millions of people. And when you spew out ignorant, stupid statements like he did to people who are listening who may not know more about the medium, all he's doing is perpetuating stereotypes. And the stereotype traditionally of the comic book collector or the comic book fan is some unmarried, useless, nerd in their mother's basement who doesn't wash and doesn't shave and doesn't shower and doesn't have a girlfriend and reads his funny books. You've seen The Simpsons, right? You're a big fan of The Simpsons, or at least were. Am I correct on that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
You remember comic book guy from The Simpsons, right?
Absolutely.
That's the stereotype. Well, guess what? First of all, that's not your comic book fan. I'm a collector. Would you call me any of those things? I mean, you know me. Would you say I fit the mold of any of those things? I would say not. I would say absolutely not. And anyone who knows me knows that I don't fit any of those stereotypes. Well, yeah, there's a couple who do. There's always somebody who fits a stereotype in some fashion or another. But the people I interact with in the comic book community, we're talking doctors, we're talking lawyers, we're talking professionals, we're talking intelligent people. We're talking people that I'm going to guess are a hell of a lot more intelligent than Bill Maher is. Let me give you an example of somebody who I've actually dealt with on a couple occasions, actually making purchases from him. Someone by the name of Mark Zaid. Do you know who Mark Zaid is, Stephen? You do now.
I didn't until you. Well, I do. No, not before. Not before.
Mark Zaid is an attorney from Washington, D.C. He handles cases that involve national security, security clearances, government investigations, media, Freedom of Information Act, and whistleblowing. He is very, very, very well respected. He actually teaches classes in Washington, law classes. He's been named, given Best Lawyer Awards by the Washingtonian magazine multiple times for his national security work. He's had a number of high-profile clients over his lifetime. Arianna Huffington has been a guest on Bill Maher before, right? On his shows. Not as much anymore. I'm going to guess Maher and Huffington have at least a good working relationship. Would you say that? Some sort of professional respect there, right?
Yes.
Mark Zaid actually represented Arianna Huffington amongst other major clients. He is literally a very big, powerful, influential attorney in Washington and very well respected. And guess what he does as a hobby? Would you like to take a wild guess? He's a big comic book fan and a big comic book historian. This is a guy that in Bill Maher's stupid world, I guess he's sad that a guy like Zaid actually is still alive. He thinks Zaid, I guess, by definition of what he said, is a guy who hasn't grown up, who's stuck in his childhood. Does the resume of the guy I just talked about sound like somebody stuck in their childhood to you? Does that sound like somebody the world would be better off without? I'm guessing no. I have no problem when you have a medium. Like we have a medium. When we get on this podcast and we talk about things, we at least attempt to make at least a half-hearted effort to research what we're talking about, to understand the topic we're talking about, to know what we're talking about. But Maher, when you make comments like this, all it does is it just shows a base ignorance. And I know from having seen his show before that he's not a stupid individual. He's not dumb. The people he brings on his show are not dumb. So I'm not really sure where he was coming from with this. I have my suspicions, but it's one of two things in my eyes. It's either trolling for ratings or part of a potentially a long con to get people to tune into his show. And you pointed out maybe he'll bring somebody on from the comic book industry to debate about it. So maybe it's essentially the internet form of clickbait. I'll say something controversial. I'll get people talking about me and my show, which, by the way, just picked back up again, as you pointed out. If that's the case, again, ignorance to get ratings is not good. And maybe if it works, if it gets him as good ratings, great. It's a success. It's still showing base ignorance. So it's either that or he actually is this ignorant about the medium. And for anyone listening who actually falls in with that line of thinking and says, yeah, comic books are stupid. They're just for children. It's ignorant entertainment. It's low intellect entertainment. Then my comment to you is, then you don't understand what the medium's all about. I'll throw a perfect example out there. And it's something we had talked about. You're familiar with the graphic novel Mouse, correct?
I do. I know it from you talking about it. And I also know that my wife, who is a high school English teacher, uses the book, the graphic novel in teaching. It's an award-winning piece of literature.
Mouse is a graphic novel that was done by cartoonist Art Spiegelman. It ran in the 80s and 90s, and it depicts Spiegelman interviewing his father about his experiences as a Polish Jew and a Holocaust survivor. The technique it uses is it represents the people involved as animals. The Jewish people are represented as mice, hence where the term mouse comes from to some extent. Germans are represented as cats, and the Polish people as pigs. It's a work of art that is a comic book, and yet is such a well-done storytelling. It is the first graphic novel to win the Pulitzer Prize. That's art. Now, Bill Maher would tell you that's not art. Bill Maher would tell you that all comic books are junk and garbage and read by 10-year-olds. Well, go tell that to Art Spiegelman. Go tell him that his retelling of his father's real life experiences going through the Holocaust are not worthy of being read. Go tell him that his work is a joke and see how he would react. But then again, my guess is Bill Maher has never read Mouse. He doesn't understand it. He doesn't know it exists. I would question whether or not Bill Maher could read at this point if he's going to make such ignorant statements like the one he made. But there you go. There's a perfect example of what comic books can do. And I've talked about it before, and he mentioned like superhero movies and mentioning, how much I guess he hates the fact that people watch superhero movies. Looking at Box Office Mojo, looking at the year 2018, if you wanted to look at worldwide grosses, these are your top 11 movies. I'm going to go 11 because there's a comic book movie at number 11. Number 1 worldwide was Avengers Infinity War, a comic book movie. Number 2, Black Panther, a comic book movie. Both of these, by the way, got excellent, outstanding reviews from critics. Number 3 was Jurassic World, which is a sequel, and it's not a comic book movie, but boy, it feels like it could be one, even though it's based on a novel, essentially. Incredibles 2 is not technically a comic book movie property, but The Incredibles is a superhero movie. So, it falls in that genre, and it's a loose adaptation of Marvel's Fantastic Four. That's essentially what The Incredibles were. So that's a comic book movie. Number 5 is Aquaman, a comic book movie. Number 6 was Venom, a comic book movie. 9, Deadpool 2, a comic book movie. 11, Ant-Man and the Wasp, a comic book movie. I hate to break it to Mr. Maher, but apparently a lot of people like these movies. And there's a reason for it. It's because the comic book medium has had at its roots your very basic storytelling ideals. One of the classic storytelling tropes are the heroic adventure, the triumph of a hero over adversarial odds, stories of morality, of good versus evil. In the case of these movies and in the case of comic books, these stories are as old as stories that were told way back when we had stories like the Iliad from Homer. Did you read? That was required reading when I was in school, was the Iliad. Did you ever read the Iliad or the Odyssey? Or you're familiar with it, correct?
I think I was supposed to read it, but I'm pretty sure
Did you read the Cliff Notes? Was that what you read?
I probably just cheated.
You probably just, well, it is kind of wordy. But, these were heroic tales, and they're basically about people, about heroes. You go back all the way to the Bible, and we always talk about the cliche, David versus Goliath, which is based on a biblical story. That's essentially a heroic tale. It's not a superhero tale, but the themes involved are all the same. And the themes that Stan Lee explored throughout comic books are themes that are important, and important not just in literature, but important lessons we can learn in life. You're familiar with the X-Men, correct? From seeing X-Men movies that we've seen over the years, correct?
Sure.
That's a Stan Lee creation. The X-Men were mutants. Mutants being people that were different from everybody else, feared by other people, hated by other people because they were different, because they had these special powers that made them different. But yet they were the heroes. Even against the people that feared and hated them, they still managed to save them and do good for them. This was written in the early to mid 60s. What could we make a comparison with? Where do you think Stan Lee may have been going with that? What was kind of going on in the mid 60s? What was kind of a big thing at that time with people that might have been
Civil
considered
rights.
Yeah, exactly. And that was your metaphor. That's what the X-Men were in many ways designed as characters to represent, were minorities, whether it be African Americans or actually any minority. And it was a story about how, yes, they're different, but that doesn't make them worse than us. That makes them in some ways better than us. And it makes them just as important as we are. Spider-Man, arguably Stan Lee's greatest creation. I can't believe anyone listening to this doesn't know the origin of Spider-Man, but the story is about a young man who gets great power by accident. And it's a young man who's been teased and who's been bullied and who's not popular, kind of the nerd in school. He gets these powers. He has this amazing abilities. And his first instinct is to turn them into a way to make money. He goes ahead. He tries to go on television. He tries to make money for his family. And he's immediately gripped with this sense of, I have this power. What can I do with it? Sort of that thrill and that rush of getting this new power, until he ignores a burglar that goes by him who ends up killing his uncle. And he only finds out when he tracks the killer down and realizes, this is someone I let get away because I didn't want to get bothered. And the lesson at the end of that story is the great line, with great power comes great responsibility. What better lesson or what better moral could you have than that in a story? How is that not literature? How many stories in literature have we seen where where something along those lines is basically the main theme of the story? Comic books are not just, hey, this guy in a cape dresses up and he goes and he punches a bad guy. At various points, comic books have been silly. They've been stupid. There have been terribly written books, but the whole medium does not exist solely for the entertainment of a 6-year-old. Stories are published all the time that are of adult nature, like Mouse, that don't deal with superheroes. And you have stories dealing with superheroes like the original Spider-Man story and many other stories in the genre that deal with adult themes, that deal with adult decisions, deal with adult realities that teach us lessons and teach us morals. And what's wrong with that? If you've ever looked, there's some great artwork in some of these stories where people tell stories through art. And it's no different. Mocking people who are in the comic book field, mocking people who are comic book fans, mocking people who like comic books, it would be no different than if I mocked you because do you like classical music? For instance, do you know someone who likes classical music, like Mozart or Bach or Beethoven or somebody like that? Do you know someone who likes that?
I don't know anyone who listens to it on a regular basis.
But people do. People do, right? Would you mock them for it? Would you belittle them for liking that music? Well, that's outdated. That's old. Those people are all dead. That music's boring. Who does that? Wouldn't that show your ignorance by doing that? Here's a better question. Would you do that? Would you say that if you'd never listened to the music before? Would you possibly acknowledge that, you know what, maybe I don't like the medium, maybe I'm not a fan of it, but it doesn't mean I need to go ahead and crucify the people or belittle the people, or like I said, come out and actually say something like, I wish you weren't alive? What kind of idiot makes that statement? I mean, I know what type of idiot makes that statement because I just saw him make that statement. My question is, how old's Bill Maher? Is he going to grow up? Is he going to mature a little bit? Or is he going to be... The irony is he's attacking people for being children, for liking the medium. And he's basically acted like a child in his attack because he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's not informed about what he's talking about. And his statements are so childish and so immature and so inflammatory that, again, I would only say that he's trolling and he's looking to do this purposely, because I cannot believe someone like him could be this ignorant. But there you go. There it is. And the only thing I'll finish with is that he talks about, how childish everything is and people need to grow up. In 25 or 30 years, people will still remember who Stan Lee is. People still remember the people who created Superman. Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel are still icons for creating the ultimate first real superhero who kind of kickstarted the entire comic book industry to a large extent. Everyone knows Superman years and years later, right? Superman was created in 1938. Who in the world doesn't know who Superman is? Everyone's heard of him, right? His creators will live on forever. Stan Lee, long after his passing, 25 and 30 years from now, people will know who Stan Lee is, and they will know him because the characters he's created are still going to be in our popular culture in 30 years. Who the hell is going to remember Bill Maher in 30 years? Who's going to remember anything? What has he done? What has he done creatively to even match anything Stan Lee's done? Other than run his mouth and be a big mouth and spouse off some ignorant opinions like he did on Friday, who's going to remember him in 30 years? I guess I will, because I'll remember if I'm still alive in 30 years, I'll remember what an idiot he was on Friday. But who else is going to remember him? My guess is he's going to be forgotten. He's going to be yet another guy where we'll look back and maybe you'll find him on a Wikipedia page and maybe you'll be like, well, yeah, I remember him. Decent comedian, had a TV show. Yeah, it was a little controversial. I remember he talked about some things. Other than that, yeah, I'd forgotten about him. He has no lasting contributions to the cultural society. Stan Lee does. Maybe his comments are out of jealousy. Maybe deep down he realizes no one's going to give two shits about him in 30 years, while Stan Lee will still be remembered. But that's fine. He can spouse all he wants because when he says things like he did on Friday, he just makes himself look stupid. So if that's his goal, mission accomplished.
In response, I'm in no way going to sit here and defend what Bill Maher said or to defend what he does. But Bill Maher doesn't really care. That's always been his thing, is that he'll just say things and he doesn't care what other people think. And he's not worried if he's pissing people off. He was kind of laughing it off that he lost 40,000 Twitter followers after his initial statements about Stan Lee when he passed, because he just doesn't care. And he does say things that are controversial. And I watch him almost every week. And there are some times when he says things that just make me go, I don't really feel that way. I don't believe that. I feel like he's completely off base. Sometimes it's a silly thing. Sometimes it's a serious thing. This obviously was one of those where it's like, he said this. I don't think he really wants anyone to die over this. I just think he thinks it's a silly medium. And he's not the only one. I remember growing up that my parents wouldn't view a graphic novel or comic books as literature. And, you know, the fact that they wanted me to read a certain amount every day when I was growing up. And that didn't count, you know. Oh, that's just a picture book. That doesn't count. I mean, that's what old people say a lot of times will say about these. They're picture books. You know, are there any words or is it just pictures? And let's be honest, it probably took a book like Mouse to win the Pulitzer to start gaining more acceptance. My wife, again, a longtime English teacher in high school, it took a while before the teaching profession would even take a book like that and put it into the curriculum. I don't agree with it, but I understand the thought process that makes you make that general statement. We always talk about how making a general statement about things is really almost always a bad idea because things aren't always as clear cut as black and white. There were also other things that happened that came of this statement that he made. Kevin Smith tweeted and basically just stated, yeah, you know, he's a good guy. He's just a stoner. And sometimes he just says things, you know, you just got to kind of brush them off. And Kevin Smith is, you know, obviously, you know, a filmmaker, but he's probably a fan
He's a big comic book fan. He's worked in the industry as well. He's written, though I will say he's not terribly well respected necessarily in the industry. Only because his notoriety is that he works on projects. He'll start something and then he just doesn't finish it. So there's that. But he is a huge, for what we're talking about, he is a huge comic book fan, obviously. He had a TV show that was running a comic book, was it Comic Book Men on AMC that was running after The Walking Dead, which I don't know if it's still a thing. He actually has a part ownership in a comic book store in New Jersey. and he would appear on the show and they would talk comic books and various things. So he is a big fan of the medium. So he's one fan that's not, I guess, took it okay and wasn't terribly insulted by it. He's in the minority, judging by the comic book community that I know. He's in the very, very small minority in that, though he is a high profile guy as far as that goes.
Yeah, I think his point is that, don't have such thin skin about it. I mean, people are going to say stupid things. If you care about what other people say about you, some people that you don't necessarily respect, why do you even care? It doesn't really matter. Bill Maher is going to say things. He's going to say things controversially. I don't think he just says them to say them. I honestly think that he does believe that. He's not somebody who just says something, but he knows that he has gotten to where he is in entertainment, and he is an entertainer. He is not a journalist. He is not. His show does deal with serious topics, but it still has the feel of a comedy show. It's kind of the same feel as, say, The Daily Show or something like that. His ratings have never been higher, and it's not. I don't feel like he does things for ratings. I think he just has realized if he's just himself, those ratings are going to come. And, he says these controversial things and he doesn't back down from them. He's not going to say these and then not bring somebody on who has an alternate opinion on this subject. It wouldn't shock me if he's going to bring on somebody who is a comic book aficionado in the near future to have a discussion about this. He's always open to opposing viewpoints, people that he's had on his show just in the last 2 years, keeping in mind that he's very much on the liberal side. Ann Coulter, Grover Norquist, Steve Bannon, Ben Shapiro, Boris Epstein, Roger Stone, who's just been in the news because he was indicted on Friday. He had him on his show. Tomi Lahren. He's had some very controversial people who are definitely on the opposite side of the political spectrum, opposite side of where he stands on the issues. So it wouldn't shock me if he brings somebody on. Again, I don't always agree with what he says. He's said some very disparaging things about Muslims in the past. You can't paint a picture and just say everybody of a certain type is like this, right? All Muslims are bad. All comic book collectors need to grow up. These are broad strokes that we as a society need to get away from.
You said you don't think he does this for ratings. I'm going to argue.
I don't.
I'm going to argue that I think it's very calculated. Then you said that he understands that being himself, being controversial, gets people to watch. That gets people talking. Right? My feeling is that he knows that when he went into this show on Friday and he knew that there was still lingering controversy over that this was an opportunity. I mean, this story made multiple major news sources. Like I saw it from, I forgot what it was that popped up on my phone, maybe something from USA Today or whatever, for whatever reason. But when I first woke up on Saturday, that was like the first thing that popped up on my phone as a notification. Oh, by the way, this is going on. So he made headlines. He made news. I think he's smart enough to understand how to, that it's calculated on his part to get people talking. And whether or not, I'm not saying he doesn't 100% agree with what he says. And I'm not going to disagree with you because you're correct. He brings on people for discussion that are of differing viewpoints. And he does so for the purposes of drama, because it makes for a good show. If you have four people basically in a circle jerk with one another, talking about how smart you are and how right you are, and you're smart and you're right, and we all agree, and happy, happy, joy, joy, then that makes for a little bit of a boring show, doesn't it? So yeah, he does those things. He's a smart guy. He maybe believes this, I guess. This is what he thinks. And you mentioned his comment about the Muslims. Maybe that's what he actually believes. He won't back down from it, but I don't believe that he's not smart enough. So this is me giving him credit for it, that he's not smart enough to realize what works and what stirs the pot. So my guess is that he said this with intention, not just to be a dick about it, but to get people talking, which it did. And again, what's the old saying? The worst thing you can have, whether you're a company, if you're a product, if you're an entertainer, whatever, if somebody hates you, if they love you, either one is fine sometimes. You don't want apathy. You don't want people to not care. That's the worst thing you can have. If you're looking for someone to buy your product or someone to watch your TV show or someone to buy you as an entertainer, apathy is the worst thing you can have. And the one thing I will say, I'll give him credit, at the moment, there's no apathy towards him. There's definitely feelings being expressed towards him from certain parts of certain communities, like the comic book community. And what's the old saying? There's no such thing as bad publicity. It's only good, right? So I will say he's smarter and that this is calculated, but I don't think he manufactured his feelings about it. I don't think they're any less ignorant. And you're right. You mentioned Kevin Smith saying kind of like, well, you guys kind of let it roll off. I'm a passionate person. You attack something that means something to me, then I'm going to fire back. It's just the way I am. There are other people that would say, I don't care. He's ignorant. Let him live in his ignorance. The good thing is we have this podcast, among other things, to be able to point out when people are being ignorant. And that's one thing I think over the course of doing this podcast, we're probably going to do it more than once because, unfortunately in this world, there's more than one or two ignorant people. There's ignorant people all over the place, correct?
And we have our ignorant moments.
Oh, yeah.
Let's be honest.
Absolutely. All you had to do was listen to all of our picks for the last several weeks, and you'd see that we might be treading the line of maybe not ignorant, but certainly stupid, right? Is that a fair statement?
So we've been told by some of our listeners.
Yes, we have been. Yes, we have been. I got really fired up about it because it means a lot to me. I've like I said, I've collected heavily. I've read heavily. There's some great stories and great literature in the medium. There's great artwork in the medium. There are some creative geniuses in the medium that have gone on to work into other fields in entertainment, that have gone to work in television, gone to work in movies. It's not child's play. And like I said, it's something that means a lot to me because I read books as a kid. I reconnected with them as an adult. So it's something that's important to me. So when it gets attacked, I get defensive. And, that's just my personality. But I'll let it go at that and just say, he can be stupid. Like I said, to me, he made a very stupid statement.
He did. I'll be the first person to admit I don't agree with his statement. I think he was stupid in saying it. He was an ass about it. And I'm sure that he's going to hear about it. I mean, he already has heard about it. But like I was saying, I don't think he cares. I don't think he cares what you think, I think, or anyone thinks.
He doesn't care what we think.
And that's what I was saying. Like, he just doesn't care. He knows that if he is unfiltered and is just himself, that sells. And that's what his job is. He's an entertainer. You may not agree with him. You may not even like the way he goes about it. But the one thing you can't say is he's unsuccessful. He has been very successful his whole career in doing this. And that's why he did it. With that, let's finish up today. Our next podcast is going to be on upcoming movies. We're going to be looking at the January to June window. And later this week, we'll be doing our Super Bowl picks. We'll be looking at some straight bets. We'll be looking at prop bets. I'm actually headed down to Atlantic City this week, not just to bet. I'm actually working down there. But it will be my first opportunity to place legal pro football bets. First time I've ever done this legally.
Considering our track record, this ought to go really well, right?
Well, it probably won't, but we're gonna try to work out something. I'm gonna come up with a game plan of how I'm gonna place my bets, and we'll go and do it, or I'll go and do it. I'll go to Atlantic City, place my bets, and we'll follow up and see how I did.
Did they tell you they had a red carpet available for you? Because I assume they're rolling it out for you at this point, if they've listened to our podcast.
Well, if I was a big roller, maybe, but I'm not talking about spending any kind of huge amounts of money. I'm going to try to take like maybe $100, try to split it up amongst straight bets, prop bets, maybe some parlays. I don't know. We'll look at all the bets that are available.
Don't dig into the 401k for this trip. That's basically the advice.
Correct. I'm digging into the piggy bank. I'm like, I got about $100 in the piggy bank. I'm going to take that. We'll see if we can turn it into $10 or $20.
A small loss would be acceptable, is what you're saying.
Yes, exactly. So thanks a lot for listening. We'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Excruciating Minutiae Podcast. Check us out at excruciatingpodcast.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on any of your favorite podcast platforms and follow us on Twitter at excruciatingpod. See you at the next episode.